Hello, this is Jason Green with Zurmo, and today I'm going to talk about an important concept, which is the metadata in the application and how it's stored and the logic for how that's managed. So right now at least, there's three basic areas of metadata. There's modules, there's models, and there's views. And for example, modules has metadata about menus. For account menu, there's links at the top of the page, for example, to create an account or to view a list of an account. And so that those menu links are stored in the module metadata. The global search information, so, what fields in accounts are part of the global search are also in the module metadata. And then also for Designer, the Designer tool needs to understand, is the accounts module editable in Designer? Are the layouts editable? Can you make custom fields in Designer? And so that information is also stored in modules. Another type of metadata that is in the system is for the models, and that would be for an account. So an account has, for example, information such as the attributes, the name, the phone, information regarding rules such as, phone has minimum of 5 digits, and maybe, for example, annual revenue is a integer. And then also it has validation rules such as a password must validate against some sort of rule regarding its size at a basic example. But then also there's other information such as relation information. Accounts are related to contacts. Accounts have custom fields, which are the drop-downs. And also sorting information. So when you're in a list of accounts, what is the default sorting behavior? In the case of accounts, it would be the name. And then also like what elements on the screen. So a date field, for example, uses a date time, or a date field uses a date element, and that information is defined in the model. And then you have views where you're defining attributes in the layout, which elements to use. So account name is a text field, a Boolean would be a checkbox. But then you have other special ones such as address, which uses a special element, which we're going to talk about probably in another video. And so you have these three different types. And then another one you would have is custom fields. Like if you were to make a custom field in the Designer tool, called custom attributes, it would also be in the metadata. And I'm going to explain how that works. And really in our system, when you make a custom attribute, it really has there's no difference between a custom attribute and a regular attribute as far as how the data is read and how the model interacts with that. So it really is quite transparent. All right, the next thing I'm going to talk about when it comes to metadata is just a basic example of the flow of what's happening when you're getting and when you're setting metadata. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the account model, okay, which would have like name and office phone and email address information and address information as well on the model. And so there's a method on account model that is get default metadata. Okay, this is a method that's on the account model. And in this method is where you're going to see all the metadata that's defined by default for the account. So you're going to see, for example, information about name, about phone, different relation information such as, an account has contacts. And so that information is stored in the default metadata. So when you want to get the metadata for an account, now keep in mind account extends some methods, but ultimately at the end it goes back to the red bean model. Okay, and in here there's a method that's called get metadata. All right, so when you call get metadata, the first thing it's going to do, okay, so the first thing it does is it looks at the cache. And basically, metadata is cached after it's loaded on the page. It makes it faster. It doesn't have to go to the database. So it's looking at the cache. So if you are making changes to metadata and you're not using the designer tool, you do need to clear the cache as a developer when you're working with it. And that's something that's easily explained how to do that in one of our wikis. And so if there's nothing in the cache, the next thing it looks for is it calls the metadata util. And the metadata util does a couple things. The metadata util basically looks in the database to see if the metadata is defined. Because remember, this default metadata, this is really just, you know, an array of data. So if it finds it in the database, it returns that array of data. If it doesn't find it, then it looks at get default metadata. Now, the same is, the reverse of that is true. So, for example, when you're setting metadata, when you set metadata, when designer tool, let's say you add a custom field to accounts, I don't know, we'll just say it's description 2 or something. And so what that does is that calls into, it gets, setting metadata will, you know, take the array that you pass into set metadata and it will store it into it will call the metadata utility, which will store it into the database. So basically, after you first customize the account model, the metadata, it immediately is stored into the database. And it's not in the file system, it's in the database so that it's easier to scale, and you know, we don't have all these different files that are being cached and created in the file system itself. And so that's the basic flow of how the metadata works. Now, I use the model example, but for Vue and for modules, it's very, very similar. It's actually identical to how that operates. Now, at first, it might seem a little complicated to customize the metadata if you're not using the designer tool, but really it's actually quite easy. And here's an example. This is from the Zurmo Zoo repository. This is the Zurmo Zoo install utility, and we have a nice wiki on customizing Zurmo that has actually a lot of this information on what's going on. But if you look, for example, in this example, we added the animals module, and we wanted to add a tab at the top that defines a animal tab at the top. And really, this is something that gets loaded during the installation. So, for example, you would get, you know, all you're doing here is you're getting the metadata that it is by default, right? Or it could have been changed at that point. That doesn't really even matter. And it's saying, look, if this is not in the system, then add it. And then at the bottom down here, you can see that it's being saved. So it's actually really, really easy when you're customizing to write your own classes with some methods to basically install it. And the great thing about this install utility is whenever you're installing Zurmo, this will automatically run. So you can have install scripts that will just automatically run as part of the installation, and that will automatically, you know, become part of the system. And actually, if you're doing custom fields, which you can do those manually. You don't have to use Designer. Maybe you want the app to install with some extra fields in place. The auto build functionality in the application that auto builds the schema will pick those changes up that you made to the metadata and take care of the whole schema for you. Well, I hope this was helpful for everyone watching the video to learn more about the metadata, since it is a fairly important part of the application. And I'll try to put together a wiki article or some additional information to get more in depth with metadata. Thanks again for watching.